Hi there folks, whilst today's demo is about identifying team sprawl using the Graph API, it's also about how to use Power Automate to manipulate arrays and the data that comes back from Graph. How can you repurpose it without using apply to eaches? So it's a very good example today of using XPath, using select, but also that I went with the new designer. So I fought through it, I've learnt lots as a result, found a few bugs which I'll report back, but it shows you how you can build out some pretty complex flows using some advanced techniques. So on screen right now you can see the data that comes back from the Graph API, and if I quickly go and jump into my Power Automate, you can see the flow that I've built without any apply to eaches or any nesting. It's very simple, but in terms of the output, very powerful. I've brought together two arrays in the form of a members array and an owners array to give you a count of both, and also some semicolon separated strings, which can be used, of course, to send out emails. So all of this is done without apply to eaches, without any nesting, and using some very advanced techniques. So hopefully I've got your attention. I look forward to hearing the comments, and without further ado, let's jump into the demonstration. So I'm going to kick things off from the Graph Explorer, and you can see I have a query on screen which is returning the top 999 groups from my tenant. There's a filter in place. It's checking to see if the provisioning options property is set to team, which should hopefully then return any of those teams associated groups that we have on our tenant. Then in order to limit the amount of data that's been returned by the endpoint, there's a select property returning the ID, the display name, and then by expanding the owner's property, we're able to retrieve the mail. Now the aim is to repurpose this data. We want to be able to get the number of owners so we can filter where there's groups with 0 owners or potentially some other type of scenario. But we also want to get the members, again, where there might be 0 members, so groups that have been created as a result of Sprawl that we'd like to try and identify using this data set. So in Power Automate, I'm going to show you how to do that. But before we go any further, however, I just want to raise a couple more things through the Graph Explorer. If I try and increase this limit to 1000, you'll see that I get an error. But if I drop, for the purpose of this demo at least, to the top 10, you'll see that I get a next link, and we can use that next link in order to receive all the pages of data back from the Graph API. So I'll implement that deliberately as a top 10 count in my Power Automate flow so that I can bring back multiple pages and form a single array of data. The other thing to note is at the moment I'm bringing back the owner's property, and if I wanted to bring back the members property also, I could stick that in there, hit run, but you'll see you cannot contain more than 2 items in an expand. So unfortunately we're not able to bring back both the owners and the members property as part of an expand. Therefore, if we want to bring back the members, we'll need to update this owners property like so. And if I just remove at the end here the members, we can run, and we can also see the members of our groups as well as our owners, but it's 2 separate queries. So the aim in this demo is actually to show you how you can combine both data sets in the most efficient manner without using nested apply to each actions. Jumping over onto Entra ID, you can see that I have deleted users open, and I have an employee that's left. So I've deliberately created a group where the employee that left owned said group. I then deleted that owner, and now that group is orphaned. So the aim is, with all that data that we capture from that Graph API, to filter based on the owner count being equal to 0, and then we'll be able to identify the 2 groups that I know this employee that's left owns. So over in Power Automate, the first action that I'm going to introduce is the invoke an HTTP request. And that will allow us to connect to Graph and bring back the necessary data. So I'm going with this pre-authorized version. Things have been shaken up a bit here. So in with the invoke an HTTP request here, the base URL and the AD resource, because I'm using delegated, are graph.microsoft.com, and I should be able to sign in there using my credentials. With that connection now in place, the method is get, and now I need to pull across that URL that I had over in the Graph Explorer from earlier, so I can copy that and paste that across. And if I go ahead and save and test, that should now bring back the necessary data from that Graph API request. And we can see with the flow now run, if I go and click on the invoke an HTTP request, we will have in the output all of those groups, and we can see the different details there about the owners. So I've been able to bring across various information based on that request, and we also have the OData next link. So I'm going to copy this key here, OData next link, because this is important for creating the next expression. Back into edit, what I'm going to do here is to insert a do until, because we're going to keep looping until we get all the data. So I'll drag the invoke an HTTP request into the do until. I need to also initialize a couple of variables. So the first one is going to be for the URL that we're going to hit, and we'll add in the initialize variable there and call this the graph URL and set that to a string, and the value is going to be based on that full link there for the owners. The next variable is going to be based on the full array of data that we get back from the graph API. So I'm going to append to this variable, we'll initialize it, call it the graph response, and initialize it as an array. And we can put in a couple of open close brackets there to define the empty array, and I'll name both of them appropriately too. So with those two variables in place, the invoke an HTTP request at the moment is based on a fixed URL. We can update that now to use a dynamic value, which is going to be based on our graph URL from the variable above. We're then going to have to insert an update to our variable. So update variable, or set variable, I think it's called. Search for that. Set variable, there we go. And what we want to do here is we want to set the graph URL to the next link. So the next link is based on the body and the key that I copied. So if I go into expressions, I can go into dynamic content. I can choose the body, which will get me that expression, put on the question mark, square brackets and single quotes, and not chuck in that string, but chuck in the OData next link. So that'll get me the OData next link in that set variable, and I can add that in there. So we'll update the graph URL with the next link. In the do until, we're wanted to check if that next link is empty. So do it until it is empty, in which case we can insert using the dynamic values here, the graph URL is equal to, and we can leave that empty, and it should hopefully jump out of that loop once we've retrieved all the data. Then in our add an action, I'm going to add a compose, and the purpose of this compose is to store the current value of the graph responses variable. Now the reason I want to do that is we're going to be bringing back multiple arrays from this loop, and we want to create a union of those arrays. So you can't actually self-reference a variable in the next action that I'm going to add in. So instead I set the value of this compose to the graph response, which is all the responses to date, and then I'll insert another action which will be, instead of appending to an array, I'm going to set the variable, and the set variable of the response is going to be an expression. So into the expression editor I'm going to type in union, and that union is going to be between the response that we get back from the invoke an HTTP request and the compose, which is a copy of the variable as things stand. So if I was to currently insert the graph response in this union and I'm updating the graph response variable, you can't self-reference. But if I change this to the output of the compose, which is a copy of that variable, I can then combine that with the body output from our invoke an HTTP request, and of course the value, because it's a value array that comes back as part of that response. If we jump across onto the Graph Explorer, that's what you can see highlighted here. This is the body, and then this small section here is the value, and it's this value array that we're trying to bring back and append into this massive response that we're creating as part of this union. So I can add that in there, and I'll update the names of these three actions. So with that in place, and just to confirm the final output, I'm going to add in another action, a compose, just for our debugging. We'll insert that here. I'll go into my inputs and I will choose the graph response, and that should give us all the records in an array. And just to fully confirm, I'll insert another compose, and into our expression editor, I can use the length expression to check the length of the graph response, just to ensure I have all those records. So we'll save and test that. and have a look at the history. So with the flow now completed, we can see that the do until loop has run 4 times, which means there'll be 4 pages of data based on the top count of 10. You may have a top count of 999 and therefore a different number of loops here, but ultimately what we've done is for each of those loops we've grabbed the output. In this case, this output here is an empty array because we're on loop 1, but here it's the variable, the current value of the variable, again and again. And of course we're using the union to bring that all together, which should bring together hopefully somewhere in the region of 40 different groups, because we've got 4 loops, all of page size 10. If I scroll down, the compose one is output of the full variable, so we've got hopefully all of our groups in here. And if I go into compose 2, we have an output of 39 based on that length, so that certainly fits with my expectations. So now let's have a look at how we can start repurposing this data. So back into edit, if we scroll down here, I can actually get rid of these 2 compose actions because they were just there for debugging purposes, and it looks like you can hit the delete key on your keyboard in the new designer and delete those actions. And the next action I want to add in is one of my favorites, the select, because I'm going to repurpose the structure of the data that comes across in this body. So in terms of an input, we want to provide our array that we've created. So I can go in here and get the graph responses, which is our value array, and start defining the map. And here I want to have the ID. I would like to have the display name of the group, and also an owner count, and also the owners. And finally, I would like to have the owner's emails as a string, but we'll work on that later. So in terms of the expressions for these, it's straightforward in that we're going to be using the item expression followed by the key name. Jumping onto graph, just to remind ourselves, we can see the value array that's returned here, and we have keys for ID, display name, and owners. So we can write the expressions, jump over into Power Automate, into our expression builder, type in item with the open close brackets, square brackets and single quotes, and first one is ID. I can copy and paste that, hit add, and do the same for the rest of them. We'll change this here to display name, and for owner count, things are slightly different. We want to know, of course, how many owners there are. So instead, I'm going to use the length expression. And here, type in length. It's going to be based on item, but rather than ID, it's going to be based on owners. Again, just to remind ourselves, the reason it's called owners is because we have this owners array. In this case, this array has one object, length will return 1, and I can add that there in my flow. In terms of the owners, it would be good just to get that owners array back in, so I can type in item, open close brackets, square brackets, and owners, and that'll bring back the owners. In terms of the owners' emails, it's slightly more complex, so I'm going to leave that as a placeholder, and we'll add that in the next part of the flow. And let's go ahead and save and test. So again, with the flow successfully run, we can see it's looped 4 times, and if I jump down onto my select, we can now have a look at the new output. On the right hand side here, we have our ID, display name, and the owner's count, of which I have 1, 1, 1. Have we got any with more than 1? Here we've got collab project that has 2 owners, and we can see our owners array followed by the owners emails, which is just a placeholder where I'll show you how we can convert this owners array into a semicolon separated string. Now, just before I jump out of this, I've noticed that the owner count has actually recorded the data type for the length as a string, which is very unusual because in a select, by default in the classic designer, it would have been an integer. So that's something to be aware of. In the filter array, where I'm looking for the owner count, if I build this in the new designer, I'm going to have to make sure that the data types match. So in this case, with owner count being a string, I need to convert it into an integer if I want to check for any that are equal to 0, for instance. So jumping back into edit, if we go and now add another action, we can go and filter that array where that specific condition is met. We will check to see where the number of owners is equal to 0. So in this case, the from here is going to be based on the output of our select. And in terms of the filter query, we need to remind ourselves of the key names. So we have a key called owner count, and we can use that in our filter array with an expression, which is going to be based on, of course, the item, open close brackets, question marks, and owner count, like so. Now, like I highlighted, it is actually coming through as a string for whatever reason in the new designer. So I'm going to specify the type with the integer expression here. and then I can make sure if it's equal to 0 and that condition is met, that will return it in our filtered array, and we'll test that just to be 100% sure. So back onto our history, down to the bottom, pop open that filter array, and we can now see in the output at the bottom here, if I pop that open, we have returned 2 groups with no owners, and we can see also the owners array is empty. If we look at the original input, we can see all of those various groups and the numbers of owners that they've got, and I know that they're actually at the bottom. There are 2 new groups that I created for this demo. They are there with no owners. So next up, let's see if we can get those owners emails as a string. So back into edit, into our select, how are we going to turn that owners array into a string of comma separated emails? Well, it's not as easy as it sounds actually. If we jump back over onto graph and have a look at one of these groups that's got more than one owner, we can see here we have this array of owners. We've got 2 email addresses. There's also another key, the O data type. We need to drop that key. We also need to drop the key name. So normally if I was to repurpose this specific array, this one owners array, I would use a select and I put it into text mode and I would define the string as the mail. Because of course I can't nest select actions unless I'm going to use an apply to each. The way to do this is actually with XPath. And what XPath will allow us to do is to turn this particular array into XML, and then I can go and query the mail element names, and with that I can return back an array of emails, and then I can turn that array of emails into a semicolon separated string. So in order to support this process, I need to add in a compose, and I'm going to add that just above our select here. It's going to have an object. So that object has a root, and then we have another key with an array, in this case an empty array, but I'm going to update this array with that of our emails. Now I've demonstrated how to use XPath in a few different videos. I'll share the links in the description, but ultimately this is what you need, a sample object. We're going to update this object within our select, and then we can use it to convert into XML and then query the emails via XPath. So jumping back into my select, I'm going to go into the owner's emails value, and we'll go into the expression editor and start building out this expression. So the expression is set property, and what set property does is it lets you take an object and update the value of a key within that object. So because we have the outputs from our compose, which contains the new structure that I've defined, I want to update the root. So in this case, question mark, and then in square brackets, single quotes, the root. Now the key I want to update is called emails in my example, and the value that I want to set it to is the item, and then open close brackets, and if we jump back over onto graph, owners. So it's specifically the owners array we want to insert here. So we finish that off with owners in that expression. So this will create an object which is based on the root and will update the emails property with the owners. But because this is nested, we actually need to then nest our expression with another set property. And so opening again with set property, an open bracket, it's based on the outputs of our JSON object, which is here. I'm going to put a comma, and then we're looking to update the root. So we're now updating the root with the update that we've applied to the emails property, and I can close the bracket there, and all being well, add it, and this will now give us our XML. So before taking it any further, I'm going to save and test and show you what we've created. So with the flow complete, if I jump down to the select, we can have a look at the output, and what we can see now in the owner's emails is this structure with a root. We have the emails property, and the emails are going to be based on that owner's array, which contains all the details with the mail and the O data type. With this now in place, we can convert it to XML and then perform some XPath on it. So back into the flow editor, if I jump down to that original select, we've defined our map, we've got our expressions, we've got our set property in order to create that new object for each of the owner's emails. And with that in place, we can now convert it to XML and run some XPath on it. Now I could go and edit this existing expression, become quite complex, or I can create another select, because remember we've repurposed the array here in this select, and now we can use that new repurposed array in another select in order to run XML. So I'll add another select, as the input to that select, I'll use the output from the select above. Remember the structure here. And what I can do in this select is into text mode, I can use that expression that we just saw, the set property, and we can use the item, which is each object within the select from above. And we're going to update a particular property. Now that property is going to be based on owner's emails, which will go with owner's emails. That's what I've created in the select above. So make sure that matches your select if you've named it slightly differently. And then this is where all the magic happens in the form of the XML. So I can move this closing bracket out of the way to give myself a bit of workspace here. And I'll explain to you how we use XML. So we'll start from the middle. We're going to use the item expression to return exactly the same value again, which is our owner's emails. So currently this set property expression would update the object with the key owner's emails with the value item of owner's emails, which is basically update itself with itself, which is no use. We want to turn this item owner's emails into our semicolon separated string. Remember, it's a nested array. So what we'll do here is we'll convert this into XML. So we prefix it with the XML expression, put the closing bracket there. That's it now into XML. Now we can go and generate our XPath expression. So we can put XPath at the front, go to the end, put in our comma, and this is where we put in our expression for XPath. So // is a wildcard. That will then allow us to get all the mail elements. Remember, we've got the mail key within the array of all those emails, and we want to specifically return the text. So here we go, we will return the text. Now with that in place, we need to make sure we put our closing bracket there, which will indicate the end of our XPath expression. And then with this new array that's being created, we want to join. So we'll type in join at the beginning with an open bracket, go to the very end here, put in another comma like so. And what do we want to join with? Well, I'm going to join with a semicolon, and I need to put my closing bracket for my join. So I can bring the final closing bracket back up into play, which is the one for the set property. And hopefully if I hit add, we have a valid expression. So just to pop that open up and have a look again, we are going to be setting the property of an object where the key is owner's emails, and then we're looking at this item owner's email, which is the original value. We're converting it into XML. We're then using XPath to run an expression, which is to get all the mail elements and convert it to text. And then we're going to be joining them with a semicolon to give ourselves a semicolon separated list. Now, the owner's emails, as you can see here, as I've highlighted and highlighted again, is all based on my select above. It's based on this key here. That's why I've written item owner's emails and also referred to the key as owner's emails. This select is going to traverse the select above, hence why in this expression we see owner's email there and owner's email there. The key name and then the expression to retrieve that value from the key. So let's try and test this now and see what happens. So not what I expected, the flow has failed, and if I look at the select, it is giving me an error message about the XML. And as I look at the select above and look at the output, I've noticed where this error has come about. The owner's email property, at the moment, this value here is being treated as a string, whereas in the classic designer, it would actually be treated as JSON. So when I pass this into the XML expression, because it's a string, it's not valid, and we get the error message that we're seeing here. So if you're building this in classic, the expression I just demonstrated will work. If you're building it in the new designer, unless there's been a bug fix or a change to be on parity with the classic, you need to make a change to the expression, and I'll show that to you now. So into the editor, if we jump down into our select, pop open that set property expression, basically this value here, this item owner's email, is currently returning as a string. And so this could apply potentially to a third-party system. You need to convert it into JSON and validate it. You can wrap that in the expression JSON like so, and update it, and that will turn the stringified value into valid JSON. Looking back at that select above, the reason it's happening, very much like the owner's count, which should be returned as an integer based on the classic designer, it's been returned as a string. The same is happening here, and I believe the reason that's happening is if I go into text mode, we can see that both of these values are quote encapsulated, which is why both of them are now being returned as string in the new designer versus the classic. So there's ways to get around it, but it's a useful thing to experience and see, making sure that the values within your arrays are the expected data types. So with that in place, I'm now hoping if we test it, we should get some examples of output where I have the semicolon separated emails. So this is fantastic. The flow has completed, and if I jump down to the bottom, we can have a look at that select, have a look at the raw outputs, and we can now see that where there's a count of 1, obviously there's just a single email address, but if we scroll down and find that example, we had 2. There we go, we've got both and Dave and Alex as a semicolon separated string. We could plot that straight into a send an email action and notify them as the owners if we needed to do so. Right, with that out of the way, I'm going to do exactly the same thing now with the members, but I'm going to zoom on through it. So it's repeating exactly the same thing that I've built here as before. I'm going to have a variable for the URL, a variable for the response, create that loop, and then create the select actions in order to create a similar array for the members of groups too. So back into edit, rather than subject you to my voice for the next 2-3 minutes, I'm going to rattle on through this build and get the other part built, and then we can talk about what the next steps are for combining those two arrays of both the members and the owners. So I've made those changes, I've created a parallel branch with identical actions initializing a new variable for the URL for the members and also the responses. Doing that loop, the do until, invoking the HTTP request and using that compose trick so that we can use the union there to create that complete array of all the responses. And then we have similar, again, I've made changes to the select so that some of those expressions are updated to point to the correct values in the array. And maybe worth actually just quickly popping open this and looking at the raw output. We can see that we're no longer talking to the owners array, it's now the members array. So make sure you update any of those expressions that were referring to owners. It's now members in this right-hand side branch. But we still have that mail property, so all that XML magic still works. And as we scroll down right to the very bottom, if I select my members with email and we have a look at that raw output, same structure. I've gone and renamed those keys in the select that we have, so the select members. We now have members count. This is where I've changed the expression, so it's the members array that I'm checking the length of. We have members here for the email, and then the members emails, which is that clever trick with the XML and XPath. As you can see, where I've got 3 members, I have 3 different email addresses that are comma separated. And if I zoom down the rest of this output here, let's have a look at a larger group. There's definitely more examples where we have loads of members. We've got members number of 8 here, and if I whiz through that, hopefully we can see all the names: Alex, Diego, Isaiah, etc., Lydia and Miriam. So we've got all of them in a nice string which we could reference in and apply to each loop if we wanted to email those members about this particular group for whatever reason. Anyway, what I'd like to demonstrate now is how can we actually join the data that's in both of these arrays. So we've got a select owners with email array and we've got select members with email array. Wouldn't it be nice if we could join them based on what's a primary key? It's the ID of that group name. How can we do that without using an apply to each? So what you're seeing on screen right now is a video that I've produced previously showing you how to efficiently join arrays using a primary key without using an apply to each. And the whole idea is that you repurpose the original array so that the primary key heads up the object. So at the moment you can see 2 examples where there is a common denominator. The customer ID appears in 2 different arrays and we want to join them to create this brand new array. Same idea with our owners and members across those groups. What we can do in Power Automate using a select action is actually to repurpose that array so that the primary key heads up the object like we see here. So we've taken the original array structure that has an object containing the primary key and we convert that into an object where the primary key is now the key value for the key and the object. And so what that allows us to do then is to address each object based on the key. So if you're following me, what this means is if we look at one of the examples here where we've got the raw output, we can see we've got an ID for the group. So we've got an ID here, FA ends, and A3 for this one. And if we look at the members, it'll be the same idea. It'll be FA and A3. So our primary ID across both of those arrays match. If we can get these IDs to head up each object, we can then call the object by the ID from the other array and join them based on that primary key. So the first thing we need to do is to convert one of these arrays into this new structure where the ID heads up each of these objects. So back into edit at the bottom of my flow, what I'd like to do now is to add in a select, and ideally I'd like to bring these 2 parallel branches back into a single. But it looks like in this new designer that's not possible. So I'm going to use a select, and with that I'm going to insert the input as the output from the action above, the select owners with email. So there's our input. I'm going to put this into text mode and then I'm going to create a concatenation using the expression. So into the expression and type in concat, and what we're going to do is we're going to bring together a double quote in single quotes and then the value item with the ID, which is the one we want to head up the whole entire object, and then another comma, and we're wanting to add in another double quote in single quotes, but with a colon. And then we're going to add in the expression item. And so what that'll do is that'll create a string that has a double quote, the ID, a double quote and a colon, and then the entire object for each of the objects within our array. So I'll hit add, and then what we want to do is to try and turn this into an object, and we can do that with a compose. So currently we have an array of new strings that I've created based on that concatenation, but now what I want to do is I want to bring that together. So again, into the expression builder, and I want to get the output of our new select, which I've just left as select at the moment in terms of the name. Then I want to join everything, so we're going to use join and the value to join with, which is going to be a comma. And again, when writing expressions, I always start from I notice I've got an error there. I always start from the center and work my way out. So we've managed to join all the objects, which are strings, using a comma. And now I want to use concat again. And with concat, I want to add both a squiggly bracket, opening one, and then at the very end, I want to add a closing squiggly bracket. Now, if you're thinking at this point, this is far too complex, I do have a feature-length video that shows you why I'm doing all of this. So I'll include that in the description as well. But what that'll do now is bring together everything in the select. It will join it with a comma, concatenate it with the opening and close brackets, and then it will validate it with the JSON expression. So hitting add, that's all accepted. If I save and test, we'll look at the output. That'll be us ready to then join these two arrays using the ID as the primary key. And the only thing I need to work out is how am I going to bring those two branches together in the new designer. I suspect I'm going to have to jump back into the classic. So there's my flow completed as expected. And if I scroll down and look at those two new actions, if we have a look at the select, we can see what that output looks like now. We can see that we've created a string with the ID heading up the full object for each of the objects in the original array. So our original array is like so, but now we've moved that ID to the start of our object. And then if we look at our compose as an output, we can have a look at this raw output. Hopefully, if it loads up, it's going to make us look at it in this new screen. Can we look at it here? We can. So we've got the ID heading up each of these objects. So now I can call the object by the ID and reference the ID, the display name, the owner count, the owner's email, using this ID in our expression. And this is fantastic. So this is the magic now. If I close this and go back into edit, I am pretty much positive that I cannot create a join between these two branches, so I'm going to switch to the classic designer. So in the new designer, this is the action I'm looking for, new step, and that brings the two branches together. That's exactly what I want to do. Can't do that in the new designer. So I'll feed that back. I'm going to pick out a select, and this is what's going to allow us to join the members with email here with the owners with the email using this new compose that we've created here. So I'm going to rename this just so I can remember what it is. It is my compose with ID heading up the owners, for want of a better description. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the data from this select members with email array. So in terms of the input here, I'm looking for the select members with email. There's the output. And what comes next is I need to be very specific about what I need to get. So if I have a look at well, not the select members of email, but the select members, I'll see what IDs or what keys I have here. So I've got the ID, display name, members count, members, and members email. So I think actually what might be easiest for me to do is put it into text mode and copy this and paste it into this select. So into text mode, paste it, and then back into normal mode. These expressions, the ID is correct, the display name is correct, the length I need to update because I want it to just point at the item and members count, because of course that exists in the array above. So I can update that. Members is fine. The members email I want to update. So again, it's just pointing to item members email. So I can go and pick this and type in item and then square brackets, single quotes, and members email. And it's a little bug here. So I say, okay, perfect. So we've got the members email in. And now this is the magic where we start pulling across the data from this new array above using this ID. So we know we can get the ID using item ID. We want to go and get the particular object from this using the ID. So we will get the owners and we will get the owners count, and we will also get the owners emails. And the way that we do that is with the following expression. So we're back in Classic. The trick here to write expressions in Classic is to insert a space, go into dynamic content, and then we choose the value we want. So in this case, it's compose with the ID heading up the owners. So compose with ID heading up the owners. I pick the output. There's our lovely big expression. You can see why we want this new designer, because it gives us more space for creating expressions. But in the square brackets here, I'm going to be inserting item and open close brackets, the question mark, and then in square brackets ID. So what this is now given me, based on this ID, it is looking up that ID in the new array here, and then we can pull upon the owners count, and owners emails. And the way that we do that is another question mark, square brackets, and we can type in owners for the owners. I'm going to copy that expression, and I'll do the same then for the owners count and also for the owners emails. And that, believe it or not, is it. So this is our combined array. So I'll call it select combined members and owners. And with that, of course, you could have a filter that specifies we want everyone where the owners are equal to 0 or the members are equal to 2 or greater than 1, all using a filter array. So I'm going to test this, make sure that we've got that combined array, and then call it a day, I think. And if anyone has any questions about what they can then do with this combined array, how could they potentially use it and apply to each, how could they send out emails, etc., leave your comments and ideas in the chat below, and I'll have a look and see what I can do. So let's have a look at this combined members and owners. If I go and show the raw output, we can now see that the different groups, we have the owners emails, we have the members count, the owners count, albeit something has gone wrong here. I suspect I've got a typo. Let's see if we can correct that so we're happy. So the most likely cause is that I have a typo somewhere. If we have a look at the raw output here, we know that there is an owners count, or in fact an owner count, and there probably lies my error. I think I put in owners count rather than owner count in my expression. So if I jump back into edit, we can go and jump down to my owners count key. If I look at the expression, go to the very end, have I called it owners? I have called it owners. So update that to owner count. We can test it again, make sure that we get the count come through. Let's go and hunt down the particular one that has 8 different members, and then that's it. So there we have it. We have, if we look at the output, we have now got the owner count. I can see an example of one owner, which fits. I've got 2 members, and again, I can see an example of 2 members there. If I scroll down a wee bit, we've probably got our example of many owners. In fact, if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, I think we've got an example of a group with no owner, and also a weekend hobbies group where there is no owner, but we still have 3 members, Damien, Alex, and Henrietta. So I could, with this data, of course, now filter on this new array where different scenarios apply, like where we have members but no owners, or there are just no owners, and then very quickly be able to get the member's email address. Lots of different potential with this new data structure that's being created. So finally, just for completeness, I promise this is it. This is the final flow in the new designer. You can see it's actually understood the branching and the fact it comes together, even if I can't create it in the new designer. And if I was to add a filter array at the very end, just to check for the scenario where we have an owner's count of 0, if we go and add the select combined members as the input, so we'll go with the select combined members as owner's input, which is an output, and the expression then for the owner's count, so item open close brackets and owner's count, we can check to see if it's equal to 0. Actually remembering that this is a string, so we need to convert it into an integer. So there we go, update. So let's save one last time, we'll test it, make sure we get the desired output, and I am done. Well, would you look at that, happy days. So the whole flow is run successfully. It's gone down the branching, we've created that new array, and if I have a look at the filter, I would very much hope in the raw output I have the example of the 2 groups with no owners and showing me if any of them, for instance, have members, because of course it's now based on that combined array. No apply to eaches, super efficient. How about that? So if you're still watching, I'd like to call you one of my super fans, and please do let me know in the comments below. Today was a bit of an epic journey, but still hopefully loads to learn and loads to showcase. As always, it's great to hear from folk. Please make sure you leave your comments, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Thanks for watching.